Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we shall be discussing the death of Sinwar, the architect of October the 7th and number one on Israel's target list as the leader of Hamas in Gaza, was killed by the IDF last week. And we're asking, what impact will this have on Hamas and what impact will this have on Israel's war in Gaza? And in this program today, I'm joined by my good friend Alistair Scott, who's a regular to the Middle East Report. Alistair, it's great to see you again.
It's good to be back with you, yeah.
And Alistair, do you want to give our viewers a little bit of an update on the kind of ministry for Vision for Israel and the vital humanitarian work that they are doing, particularly in this time of crisis and this time of war for Israel?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a very important part of the ministry for many years, but particularly at this time of year and during this crisis or the conflict that's been going on for the last year now. It's over into its second year time-wise, according to our calendar. Very much involved in reaching out to the families who are needy, displaced people, particularly from the north of Israel, where they've had to be moved out of the border countries. Everyone knows about that. And they are needing education for the kids. Most of them are without their jobs. So it's been a very important time. Not only, you know, we all know that Vision for Israel has been very involved in the bomb shelters and up in the north and down the south, but now it's more reaching out to the humanitarian aid and aiding the families, making sure that they've got food. And a lot of times is working with the Holocaust survivors as well. You know, I'm thinking at this time of year, we would always have them come to the Millennium Center and have parties for them and encourage them and, you know, just celebrate with them, company together. But at these times of year, during this crisis, they too need a lot of support with humanitarian aid, with food. As we're coming into the winter, obviously, they need warm clothes and blankets and all those sort of things as well. So, yeah, Vision for Israel is very involved in reaching in day-to-day needs within the communities and obviously spreading the truth. I mean, you know, being part of Revelation TV here, that we want to give the truth about what's going on in the Middle East and not just a slanted bias, which seems to come from a lot of the main media channels that people watch. So I think it's a very, very important time for people like Vision for Israel, not only to be reaching out into the communities, but also telling people in the church. I think our biggest challenge in outside of Israel is to get truth into the church, the heart of the church, where they are listening to reports about what's going on in Gaza. And I was talking to our own pastor this morning at a prayer meeting and how people as Christians are actually living in their emotions rather than the truth and what there's a biblical truth about what's going on at the moment. So that is an important part of our ministry in this nation as well, reaching out to leaders, pastors, encourage them to keep strong and faithful in the God of Israel and keep being a prayerful people. I mean, it's a time for intercession as there never was before, in my lifetime anyway.
But in recent weeks, we've certainly seen the answer to prayer as well. I mean, one of the groundbreaking stories we're discussing in this program is the death of Yahya Sinwar, not only the head of Hamas in Gaza, but also the architect of October the 7th, and not only a kind of vile and evil man. We know that this is a game changer in Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza, that Israel's managed to take out its key leader, who was number one on their target list and who's been hiding for over a year now in this almost 300 miles network of terror tunnels and surrounding himself with hostages. So what do you make of this incredible announcement that the IDF have actually killed Sinwar last Wednesday?
I think it was amazing, really, because it's been an answer to prayer, because intercessors all around the world, and particularly in our groups, have been praying because we see this man as an evil man, just consumed by annihilating the Jewish people, you know. And it was miraculous. It was talk about the hand of God actually having him in the right place at the right time to be taken out. So it's tremendous news in so many ways, and also the effect it has. I'm pretty certain it's going to bring things to an abrupt end. I think we've already started to see a lot of the Hamas operatives, pockets of them, handing themselves up to be arrested or taken as prisoners. So yeah, it's a big game changer. It must be a great relief in a way for Israel, because the battle up in the north is hotting up even more. They can do without having to fight the battles on either side of the nation. So yes, it's so good to see the evil man, and you see God's focus to make this happen for the IDF.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, what this is as well, because he's such a big figurehead and a charismatic leader within the Hamas terrorist movement, that to have a caliber of leader like himself actually being taken out means that Israel is in a safer situation, that the Israelis can sleep a little bit easier as of last week's, knowing that they've assassinated and killed the leader of Hamas in Gaza, their #1 list on their target list to assassinate. And of course, you know, they always say that if you take out one leader, there will always be others that follow, but that's not necessarily the case, because with his kind of experience in terrorism, the sheer fanaticism and absolutely consuming hatred of Israel means that it's very difficult to replace individuals like him. And of course, what we've seen in Hezbollah as well, Alistair, is that Israel takes out Nasrallah, the terror chief of Hezbollah, and then immediately there are other couple of replacements have also been taken out. So if Hamas then announce this is going to be the new leader of Hamas, then it means that they become the #1 target, and within a certain amount of time they're taken out. So we're hoping and praying with the death of Sinwar could actually lead to the hostages actually being found and actually released, and would actually give up a lot of this remaining Hamas terrorists wanting to fight and carry on the war against Israel.
I think there's no doubt about that too. I think as soon as anyone gets the leadership role, he knows he's got a target on his back. He'll be the ace in the pack, so to speak, that the IDF would be looking for. And you know, you run out of leaders after a while. You know, it's moved from one to another. And I think this is such an important time with Sinwar being removed. I think it really does change things around, and certainly with the IDF and Benjamin Netanyahu, the war cabinet, they will all be so relieved to see this man removed from the play area. And yes, it seems to be immediate, the effect that's happening. Yeah, there was rejoicing in the streets when it was announced last week. In the midst of Sukkot celebrations, there was something extra special to celebrate with this #1 enemy, #1 wicked, evil man being removed from the pack.
So let's have a look at this excellent video produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and it's entitled Sinwar Eliminated.
Yahya Sinwar, Hamas leader and mastermind behind the October 7th massacre, is no more. He was the ruthless force behind the brutal attack that claimed over 1,200 innocent lives, orchestrated countless rocket attacks, and oversaw the construction of terror tunnels, bringing years of suffering to both Israelis and Palestinians. His reign of terror ends here. Justice has been delivered, and Israel will not tolerate terror.
The IDF recently confirmed that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas and the face of evil behind the October 7th massacre, was killed in Rafah. Tonight we are declassifying footage of Sinwar from just a few hours before the October 7th massacre, as well as his movements inside Gaza as he fled over the past year. Yahya Sinwar spent years planning the October 7th attack. Each step was planned to maximize harm to Israeli and Gazan civilians and to minimize harm to himself and other terrorists. See for yourselves. This is a footage of Sinwar just hours before the October 7th massacre, where Sinwar was hiding his family and equipment, including beds, pillows, food, and water, and a television. He was hiding it inside Hamas underground tunnel network. He was doing that all night alone with his family in order to keep his position classified. It was all happening in Khan Yunis. This was a luxury that the people of Gaza did not have, as Sinwar always prioritized himself, his money, and Hamas terrorists over the people of Gaza. While hiding in the tunnels of Khan Yunis, Sinwar ordered the October 7th attack to begin. After they invaded Israel, Sinwar's army of terrorists murdered families, raped women, and kidnapped men, women, children, and babies into Gaza. 101 of these hostages are still held in Gaza after a year in captivity under ruthless conditions. Throughout the war that Sinwar started, he continued to hide underneath the people of Gaza. In Khan Yunis in February, our troops found supplies meant for a long stay in Sinwar's underground hideout, including a lot of money, food, beds, documents, a shower, and a kitchen. Then IDF operations in Khan Yunis forced Sinwar to flee to Rafah. Last month, Sinwar's DNA was found on a piece of tissue he used. A few hundred meters from a tunnel where 6 Israeli hostages were brutally executed in Tel Sultan in Rafah. Then Sinwar fled yet again. While Sinwar was running for his life and went above the ground, this was the first and last time that he encountered Israeli soldiers in a combat. Sinwar was eliminated by the IDF in Rafah last Wednesday. I want to emphasize it again. This was the first and last time he encountered Israeli soldiers, and he was eliminated. There were no hostages with Sinwar when he was eliminated. Killing Sinwar is the result of a year of operational and intelligence efforts to bring him and other Hamas leaders to justice. Sinwar has been eliminated, but our mission is not over. We will not rest until we bring all our hostages home by any means possible, and we will continue to defend the people of Israel from all threats on all of our borders. Thank you.
And that was courtesy not only of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, but also the IDF as well. And yeah, we're pleased and we're rejoicing in the death of Sinwar, the architect of October the 7th, responsible for the deaths of over 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals, over 6,000 injured, many of those critical, but also taking over 241 hostages back to Gaza. And he has their blood on their hands. And looking at the character of Sinwar, he's been dubbed Gaza's Osama bin Laden. And according to a Sun News report, he has killed his enemies with his bare hands and has literally been responsible for burying his political opponents alive. So Sinwar is a man of unspeakable evil and unspeakable hatred. And so his demise is not only welcome in Israel, but is welcomed around the world, because this man leading Hamas will only lead them into greater fanaticism. And I very much like to say that evil men may prosper for a short time, but after the horrors of October the 7th, he's had his just rewards as well. And I'm also pleased that he wasn't captured alive, because then it would have meant a show trial and pressure on Israel to release him, and then looking into war crimes. So it's better that he died the way he did than to be taken to court. That's my opinion.
Well, I think that's for certain, because he was arrested in the past and imprisoned, and then the exchange happened, and he was back out in the street, back out in the freedom, or back in Gaza there, and organising what he ended up organising. So the thought of having him arrested and then going through a trial situation, being convicted and back in a prison, and who knows, 10 years down the line, as happened before, whether there's negotiations. That was awful that he was part of the exchange of 1,000+ prisoners for the one-man Gilad, so many years ago, back in 2000, whatever it was. Yeah,
2011. But yeah. He was actually arrested in he was arrested in 1988. for trying to plot to murder 2 Israeli soldiers, but he was also, his main task as well was to find out who the Israeli informants were in Gaza and who were spying on behalf of the state of Israel, and if he'd find the collaborators, then he would kill them most horrendous ways. So we see as well that evidence has been released recently of 150 hours of transcript where Sinwar has been interrogated by the Israeli security force known as Shin Bet, who published this about a year ago. So they said that they received 150 hours of interrogation, and Sinwar admitted to 12 brutal murders, revealing sick details about how he shot his victims at close range or strangled them, and he ordered his brother to bury a man suspected of being an Israeli collaborator. Just show, for example, how vile and evil as a man Sinwar was, and the fact that he was capable of murdering men with his bare hands, and many times using the Arab scarf or the kiffa to actually murder and strangle them to death.
Yeah, I mean, he's no doubt a very evil man. It's demonic. You know, and the Bible says we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but it's, you know, principalities and powers. And there's no doubt he was taken over by that. But the man was evil, as you say. He was happy to kill people with his bare hands, shooting at close range. He was so involved. I mean, led the whole October 7th massacre, the conflict in Israel. And so definitely the best way was him to be taken out completely rather than go through any other system. But yeah, without doubt, you talk about an evil-hearted man who had, I mean, in so many ways, he was just completely focused in the wrong way to attack the Jewish people, to attack Israel as a nation, and having him taken out of the whole game plan now is a relief for all involved. But he was unbelievably evil. He was, you know, we know that his time in prison, he actually was preparing himself for when he got out to attack Israel and be more effective. So yeah, it's good. It's a game changer. It's time for IDF to move on from where they are now. No,
absolutely. But I think we also have to remember in this program as well what Sinwar did as the architect of October the 7th. So we're talking here the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, the largest massacre of Jewish people in one single day, and we haven't seen this since over 80 years ago, and that was in the Holocaust. And then the destruction of the kibbutzes and the communities in the south of Israel close to the Gaza Strip, where they say around between 6,000 and 7,000 elite Hamas terrorists carried out the massacres, which were war crimes and crimes against humanity, but also then taking prisoners, hostages from the Nova Music Festival and the kibbutzes, and then taking them back to Gaza into those terror tunnels is beyond horrific.
Yeah, the tunnel system, as we found out since October the 7th, are huge, and that's why Sinwar's survived as long as he has, because he's been moving from one location to another, using people as a human shield, particularly the hostages. And that's the sad thing, is of the 241 hostages, we've had some releases, but there's so many, over 100, that are still unaccounted for. The thought of what they must have gone through and been going through over that just over a year now is just horrendous. I don't even want to start to think about it. But he was living like a rat through those rat holes, if you want to call them, the tunnel system, which was enormous, as I say, bigger than our underground system.
About 260 miles worth.
Yeah, 260 miles of tunnels. And everywhere he went, he was taking hostages with him, so that if the IDF got close and tried to kill him, the chance that they would be killing hostages as well. So he was a very calculated man. He knew what he was planning to do, and we're just watching the film of his living quarters, so to speak, in the tunnels there, with kitchen facilities and everything else around. So yeah, quite a determined man in every way that is wrong, but just desiring to kill. destroy.
And of course, what we see there is UNRWA food aid packages and stuff as well. And of course, they also found a teacher belonging to UNRWA on him. So we know there's a direct correlation between Hamas and UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency. Of course, did a behind headlines last week saying how that UNRWA paid Hamas 2.3 billion in US dollars, and of course then we see all the money in his safe that he held as well, so he wasn't looking to be found. But I do think this does mark an incredible game changer, but also we have to reflect on the horrors that were committed on Israel on October the 7th, and the ministry they represent, Vision for Israel, have done a fabulous report, if not a disturbing report, and I warn you there are scenes of blood in this scene as Barry Siegel visits kibbutz Be'eri that was destroyed by Hamas back on October the 7th, back in 2023.
The tragedy at kibbutz Be'eri, like many other places, death and destruction, were so sad. Families, parents, children were all burnt in their homes, babies. This is what you're seeing, and this is so sad, so heartbreaking, so sad. Everybody, it's so tragic, it's heartbreaking. People that were murdered in their homes, blood all over the floor in these homes, people burnt alive. It's so sad. The parents, the children, the babies that were killed here at kibbutz Be'eri, we want to rebuild. Our hearts go out for all these families. In their memory, may we rebuild kibbutz Be'eri and all the other southern communities. So sad, so tragic.
There's Lego pieces.
You can catch
Yeah.
the feeling.
So yeah, share with people to know what happened here.
Yeah, so my mom's place, maybe you should show it with the context of the other four.
Yeah.
Was one of 4 houses that I don't know how to call it. They're not human, they're not people. They held hostage in 4 different houses in this neighborhood specifically, and this is what's left of it. And her neighbor, sure.
Yeah. Was this the house with the 8?
You see it's burned upstairs?
Yeah.
It was a living room. It's like a unit for guests, for the youngsters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And they were hiding outside.
Wow.
Upstairs, I mean.
Wow.
And it just burned them alive.
These were like teenagers, like children?
And the mother.
And the mother, yeah. כן, זה זוועת.
You come from the other side.
It's crazy. So that's an excellent report, very sad and very tragic, put together by Vision for Israel, and we appreciate that work. But it's also essential that we can't forget the horrors that occurred on October the 7th. And having visited one of those kibbutzes, not kibbutz Barrett, but kibbutz near Oz, and seen with my own eyes the devastation caused by Hamas on October the 7th, it was a Holocaust. No doubt about this was crimes against humanity. This was war crimes that were committed by Hamas, and Sinwar is directly responsible for those murders, and this is this is what's so horrific, is that here's a man that actually planned in great detail this operation. So first of all, on the morning of October the 7th, firing over 1,200 rockets and missiles into Israel to overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome system, and then to breach probably the tightest security in the world, the Eretz crossing between Gaza and Israel, and then to have in the region of 7,000 to 8,000 Hamas terrorists going on the rampage, together with another 2,000 residents of Gaza as well, murdering Israelis in cold blood in the most horrific manner. You know, we have to hold Sinwar to account essentially for his crimes. And of course, the trouble is that today, in today's kind of Western world, we see that good and evil is blurred into one. But the world vowed never again after the Holocaust. And having visited kibbutz near Oz and having seen that video from kibbutz Barrett, that was a Holocaust, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I remember I had been in Jerusalem about 2 weeks before the attack. We had a conference going on there, a prayer conference, and you know, at that time you weren't expecting what happened a couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks later. But I remember speaking to Barry just after he'd been in and done that report, and it affected him in a huge way. I mean, in part of that report, you actually see that he is quietened down. Because seeing it in reality, but of course you and Reagan went and saw that for yourselves. Yeah. And I remember meeting up with you and Reagan after, because we did some programs together, and it took you a long time to.
It didn't hit me straight away, because, you know, sadly doing these programs and doing programs on Holocaust and seeing evil, you become aware of it. You become a little desensitized to it. But after a while, it hits you about 6 weeks later. I think when you see the magnitude of what happened, you hear the stories, you see the complete devastation, and then you see the actual video footage that Hamas recorded for themselves and the footage that was on Israeli CCTV cameras, and you see the atrocities that Hamas committed themselves, and you see where you went, and then you put the video footage together and you put it up to one. You know, that was a Holocaust. But I think, you know, I don't shy away from seeing both the video and visiting Israel at that time, because it's important to know the truth. And it's important to communicate what actually happened on October the 7th so that people are aware of it. And one of the main reasons I wanted to do this was to confront what I call October the 7th deniers. People that had spoken to me personally or emailed me personally saying that October the 7th was a false flag Israeli operation, and the IDF committed the horrors on October the 7th. They are the ones that destroyed those kibbutzes. They are the ones that that sent the tanks in to destroy those communities and murder their own people as a pretext for the invasion of Gaza. I mean, the absurdity of that and the lies of that is just beyond horrific, because that is the same for me as equivalent of Holocaust denial. So it's important to see things for yourself, especially when you're reporting on it, but also to know the hearts of the Israeli and the Jewish people that have been suffering. And you can't do that unless you go to Israel and see these sites, unless you meet the people and the survivors who have survived. But the hardest thing was meeting the families of the hostages, because they're brave and they're courageous and they are determined to bring their loved ones home. But what can you really say to a mother whose son's been abducted by Hamas on October the 7th? What can you say to them? Apart from, like, our hearts are with you, our prayers are with you, we're praying, and we will highlight and bring awareness to this, but it doesn't mean anything, because, you know, you can't imagine the grief and the trauma that they're going through, knowing that their son or their daughter or their father or mother, in some case Holocaust survivors, were actually being held by Hamas, and over 101 now still held in Gaza, and we don't know their whereabouts, we don't know their condition, we don't know how many are alive. That's the big tragedy in all this.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of those terrorists, we must call them what they were, who came in through the fences, were actually people who had been working in the kibbutzes, helping with, you know, cleaning or whatever they might have had jobs from the people there, because the people who had moved to those kibbutzes were looking to hand out a hand of peace and love to what I...
Yeah, it's about 17,000. 17,000 residents of Gaza were given visas to work in Israel, to work on the kibbutzes, to work on the fields.
And all the time.
And all the time they're doing a big, massive surveillance operation on behalf of Hamas. But the Israelis were also going to build an industrial park right on the Israeli-Gaza border to improve the livelihoods of the residents of Gaza. And I remember very poignantly visiting my best Israeli friends in the aftermath of Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza back in 2014, and saying, look, these people, they have the best beaches in the Mediterranean. Why don't they build hotels? Yeah. Why don't they build nice restaurants? Yeah. Why don't they invest in tourism? But instead, the industry of Hamas is the industry of death. And that was represented in Sinwars. So share with us how, for example, the Israeli Prime Minister and the IDF have been vindicated now of going into Rafah, where they found Sinwar and assassinated him, because Israel faced huge opposition internationally from our own government, but particularly from the Biden-Harris administration, to put pressure on Israel not to actually go into Rafah. Of course, this is where they found the last battalions of Hamas, but also this was Sinwar's stronghold.
His final moment. Yeah, I mean, it did vindicate in so many ways, but a little bit like what happened on October the 7th, there was horror all around, and the reactions were so standing with Israel, but how quickly it changed. And I think the same, it was great to see that President Biden, our own Prime Minister, all said this was a great thing that Sinwar was no longer alive, because he was the orchestrator of everything evil that had happened in October the 7th and beyond. But we got to make it, keep it in the eyes of people and not allow people to forget the evil that he's done. That's why we're doing a program like this, so people are reminded. It's only a year and a couple of weeks since that horrific event happened, but how does the media switch, and how you see what's happened in our own streets in London with the pro-Palestinian protests going on, which are, I remember you being caught up in one of those by mistake.
Yeah, they're not fun.
And they're hostile, yeah. And I was the same. I'd been into the peaceful vigils and then got caught up in the other side. And yet somehow the media seems to still look on it as that Israel is the instigator of the problem. They kind of...
and they report their news post October the 7th.
Yeah.
Without giving any kind of pretext to the fact that October the 7th happened and that Israel's deterrent capabilities were shot to bits on October the 7th. And in the Middle East, it's all about a perception of strength. And Israel was seen as being incredibly weak after Hamas breached Israel's security defences on the Eretz crossing between Gaza and Israel. And apparently they broke in about 700 different places across the fence to storm into Israel. And you were saying that many residents of Gaza then followed on and carried out looting. Actually, when we visited kibbutz Nir Oz, one thing was extraordinary was seeing these kind of smart televisions or plasma TV screens as they were then, just literally on the floor. So they would have come in there into the homes of those residents living in those kibbutzes, gone into the houses to try and steal what they could, and then take them back into Israel. And of course, many of them probably got caught up in some firefighting, and so dropped the TVs and left on the floor, and then went their own way. So, but also what's really harrowing as well is you'll probably see in that video from Kibbutz Barrett, filmed by Vision for Israel with Barry Siegel, is the kind of burnt out mobile cars for elderly people that struggle to walk outside the houses. And we saw that at kibbutz Nir Oz, and these are elderly people that wouldn't have been able to escape the horrors of October the 7th. And having visited kibbutz, one of those kibbutzes, kibbutz Nir Oz, I think this one, back in December of 2022, and having visited one before in about 2001, these are beautiful communities with prestigious gardens and incredible community spirit, and they're delightful places to live. But when we spoke to one of the survivors of October the 7th, who survived the horrors of the Hamas terrorist attack, she said that prior to that this was 90% of the time paradise, but that 10% when the rockets and missiles come out, this place is pure hell. But this is vindication, isn't it, of the Israeli Prime Minister and the IDF to ignore international pressure, push into Rafah to eliminate what's left of Hamas, but also to take out effectively the terror chief himself, Sinwar.
Yeah, I think the thing is they've learned a lesson from previous decades where they were persuaded, if that's the right word, by international pressure to withdraw, to stop wars. I remember Lebanon, 10, 15 years ago, whenever the last attack came, when they got to a certain point, and then USA put pressure on them to come back, retreat, and to just leave the space, and it would be supposedly looked after by the UN forces, which has never happened, and it's happened now. And I think they know now, unless you are prepared to face another onslaught like they did on October the 7th in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 2 years' time, however, they have to fight this battle to the end and get the terrorist organizations completely removed. Then they have a chance. I mean, I'm certain there'll be an opportunity to try and rebuild Gaza, turn it in, like you said, its potential as being a Riviera of that coast. But it's not that they never received the money. They were receiving billions and billions and billions, and we know of the billionaires. We did a program on it not so long ago. The billionaires living in Qatar, not millionaires, but they were multi-billionaires, because the money which should have been used for the aid of the people, or the education of the people, or the hospitals, or anything to help the people, was never used for that. So it's not the money wasn't released and given; they just didn't use it. And what we see now, since October the 7th, is how much of that money was used putting in tunnels and underground life, because they had planned this not a few weeks before. They had planned it for years ahead, that this day was coming. And talking about the kibbutzes on the border down there, they were mainly peacemakers that lived. They moved there. They did create a paradise, as I say, 90% paradise, 10% hell. They were there because they wanted to reach out with love and help the other, the supposed enemy. Yeah,
the peaceniks, pretty much down there. I mean, the Telegraph did a very good obituary on Sinwar, and according to Israeli intelligence, this was at the Israeli military tribunal, that Sinwar was convicted of the murder of 12 Palestinians, and he thought they were informers, was given a nickname Man of 12 regarding the 12 so-called Israeli informers that were murdered at the hands of Sinwar. And according to the Israeli intelligence assessment of him at the time, this is going back to '89, says that he was cruel, authoritative, influential, cunning, and manipulative, accepted by his friends with unusual abilities of endurance, keeps secrets inside prison amongst other prisoners, and has the ability to carry the crowds. And apparently while he was also in prison, he wanted to study his enemy, so he read the early works, he learnt Hebrew, and he wanted to understand the Israeli psyche, so he read the early works of the Zionist pioneers like Zev Jabotinsky, who is the main ideological father for the Likud movement in Israel, the centre-right. He also read autobiographies of the Israeli prime ministers like Menachem Begin and Likud, because he wanted to know his enemy better so that he could kill them more effectively. Doesn't this show that he has not only an obsession with death, but an absolute consumed with Jew hatred to kill the Jewish people?
I've worked in prison ministry before, and a lot of times I meet with people who've been in prison for a long time, and they use it as an opportunity to re-educate themselves and prepare themselves for when they do get out. But this man was determined from the moment he got, and he knew he was going to be coming out. He wanted to know his enemy. He didn't want to know them in order to befriend them and to have some kind of treaty working together. He came, he studied to make sure he knew how the Jewish mindset was ticking in order to plan what he did on October the 7th. And that wasn't, as I said before, that wasn't a last minute, let's do this. He had been planning it for decades for that day, and preparing an army of terrorists ready to do what they did. And yeah, it was an evil-minded person who was absolutely determined to do evil. And absolute hatred. It's part of the education system, unfortunately, which has been funded so much by UNRWA, was to educate the Palestinian people, if you want to call them Palestinians, the Gazan people, to hate the Jewish people. You know, they treat them as if they're not even human. And this man just epitomized that. And so to have him finally, you know, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword, the old saying, and to see that him taken out by a tank shell was like his comeuppance in so many ways. If that, you know, it's not a nice way of putting it, because he was a demonic man and needed to be removed. And we just pray, we keep praying that there isn't another one coming up who's wanting to take his place. We really pray that they will start to put up the white flag and start to negotiate true peace. And I know Israel will not give in to a wrong peace as they've done in the past.
I mean, it's almost as if Israel needs to carry out something known as a kind of de-Nazification process, or de-Hamasification process, whereby children who have been indoctrinated with the hatred of Israel and hatred of the Jewish people through their education system and through their media need to be kind of re-educated, in the sense, just as well that the Germans under British and American occupation then after the Second World War went through a process of de-Nazification, the same with Japan as well, so they could be brought back into the international community. I think this is something that Israel will learn. But show us the extraordinary story that the Daily Telegraph reported, that back in 2004, an Israeli medical team saved Sinwar's life by giving him vital brain surgery to remove an abscess in his brain that kept him alive. So the difference, that wouldn't have happened with the Israelis, but Israel, being such a compassionate state and compassionate for their enemies, decided to cure him of brain cancer.
Yeah, it just summarizes how the Jewish mentality is, and as you talk about, you know, the having to change the whole education system, and it doesn't take just a couple of years. It's generational before that can happen. But yeah, they reached out to this man who's been imprisoned because he's a murderer, basically, and saved his life. Yeah.
4 life prisons, and he was serving a 22-year prison sentence.
Exactly, and they save his life. And again, looking at the people on the border in those kibbutzes, they were often going in and helping to bring people from Gaza who needed medical help. It's the DNA of the Jewish people, or the Israeli people, to help even their enemies. And you know, Sinwar was such an example of that. Even when he was in prison and needed help, rather than just allow him to die, they did the brain surgery on him and basically just prepared him to be able to come out and do what he's done. So, you know, these are stories that don't get told. You won't hear this on BBC News or News at 10 or any of those programs. That's why it's so important for us to be highlighting these. Absolutely. Because it's what the Israeli people do. They care for even their enemies. If they need help and they can give them the help, they will reach out with compassion and do everything they can to save a life. And they save one life and you save the whole life, isn't it? They're saying. And that means even the life of an enemy, which is incredible.
Yeah. And also, I mean, if we take ourselves back to 2021, we see that Sinwar was released, who was serving 4 life sentences and had already served and also serving a 22-year prison sentence, was released together with 1,026 Palestinian prisoners in return for the release of one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, who was captured by Hamas from his tank back in 2006 and taken to Gaza. And yet that was such a high price. Now, looking back on it, the life of Gilad Shalit for 1,026 Palestinian prisoners, many with blood on their hands, many of those are terrorists, including Sinwar himself, who then became the head of Hamas in Gaza, and now was the architect of October the 7th. So surely, you know, this was too high a price to pay, wasn't it? In terms of the release of Gilad Shalit. Yeah, he amazing guy and very troubled, and that's what the IDF does. It doesn't leave any man behind, and they're willing to sacrifice so much in order to bring one of their soldiers home. But you've got to think, surely this price was too much to pay.
Yeah, I mean, time has proved that was too high a price, but I remember those days of Gilad Shalit because I was in Israel a lot of the time, going back and forth when there was, yeah, just like is happening for the hostages today, there's desire to release him. They kind of knew he was alive, but how he had been treated. But, you know, at the time, they were willing to pay the high price to get this soldier back. And now, looking back, of course, it's a hugely high price. Because there's 1,026 prisoners that were released. These weren't petty thieves or people who had stolen TVs or whatever. These are mainly people who were in there for bad crimes, death, killing, murder, including Sinwar. And of course, those are the people that they would negotiate. They want those ones in exchange, you know. It was a high price of an exchange. And yeah, looking back, and I'm sure even they would say, yeah, but life is worth, one life is worth everything to the Jewish people. So I can understand why they'd negotiate that Gilad was released in exchange for 1,026. Crazy.
No, absolutely. And of course, Hamas knew that lesson. Hezbollah know that lesson. And that's why they decide to take hostages as prisoners, because they know that they can negotiate a huge number of prisoner release in exchange for that. But we pray that with the death of Sinwar, that the Israeli hostages that are remaining are alive, and we pray that they are alive, would come back home to their families, despite the trauma and the kind of post-traumatic stress disorder that they must be going through. And those that have survived and have been released just share the most horrific stories. It is going to take decades for them to heal. So we need to keep the survivors of October the 7th in our prayers, as well as the hostages as well. Now, it's interesting as well that the Telegraph report on Sinwar's obituary, that back in 2015, he was involved in the torture and the killing of a fellow Hamas commander, Mohammed Ishtawi, who was accused of embezzlement and moral crimes, including alleged homosexual activity. Sinwar later described how he and a few other Palestinians, he collected Ishtawi, blindfolded him, and drove him to a makeshift grave before strangling him with a kiffer and burying him there. And he said Ishti knew he had to die, and this is what Sinwar said later. So we know that Sinwar has no problems in murdering Israelis. He has no problem in murdering his own people. And of course, we have to acknowledge the fact that the people of Gaza are going to be better off with Sinwar dead, because the destruction that we see in Gaza today is directly the response of the murderous ambitions of Anwar Sinwar.
Yes, so, I mean, if they wipe out Hamas completely, I think the people of Gaza will see a difference, because they will start to get the aid which has been going in but not getting to the needy people. It's just being stolen by Hamas and hidden in those terrible tunnels to feed their own. And the people, they don't care. I mean, I saw a report, I think it was yesterday, of somebody who said the only people who are out to help the Gazan people are the IDF, is Israel. Their own people are out are willing to sacrifice their lives in order to get the publicity they're getting, and they don't care. They've had human shields of their own people, and now they're certainly using hostages as human shields too. As you say, we don't know what sort of state these hostages will be in, having been in captivity underground. They're moving around from place to place for over a year. But we do want to see, and I mean, it's so important for us to be praying into this, you know, pray for these hostages. Now that Sinwar's been removed, that some kind of negotiations can be done to release those hostages, but not to back off and make a peace with Hamas based on what's happened in the past. They have got to they have to de-Hamasified, if there's such a word, Gaza, in order to get a new breed, a new life into those people. And it's going to be tough. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight, but it'll happen. People will start to get the aid they need very quickly if they can get the terrorist organizations removed.
No, absolutely. And of course, the Telegraph also reported as well that Sinwar courted Iranian leaders and Hezbollah leaders in an attempt to make them participate in the attack, according to secret documents that were obtained by the Israeli military that were then seen by the New York Times. So we see that October the 7th wouldn't have happened without Iranian help. And I think it's only really by the sheer grace of God that Hezbollah didn't actually carry out a mass-scale invasion of northern Israel on October the 7th, even though they had a plan called Conquer the Galilee. And apparently this is what triggered Israel's response recently. Back in August, Hezbollah were planning a mass invasion of northern Israel by firing thousands of rockets into Israel and then releasing around 800, if not more, maybe 8,000 Hezbollah elite terrorists to carry out massacres and carry out another similar October the 7th on the north of Israel. But due to providence and God's divine protection, the Israelis got wind of this and was able then to take out the leadership of Hezbollah. So just share with us the divine providence that we saw with the killing of Sinwar last week. The fact that he'd previously been in all these tunnels, he made sure that he put dynamite around him, so if any Israelis came near him and killed him, they would kill the hostages that were around him as well. But something drove him out of ground, and that's when he was shot last Wednesday by the IDF in a tank shell.
I think there's definitely a divine intervention, similarly to what we were talking about earlier with when Gaza did their attack. If at that same point Hezbollah came down from the north, it would have been a terrible, terrible battle for Israel. And I think that was God's hand keeping them away, because I'm certain that was the plan of Iran, was to come from all sides and really defeat Israel by coming in numbers. So the hand of God was there, keeping Hezbollah out until almost the end of the Gaza ordeal going on. And for sure, I mean, this man who had stayed underground all this time, he looked like he definitely had been injured, and for some reason came out and ended up being in this block of apartments. And the IDF weren't expecting him to be there. It was the drone that went in there, and then they realized this could be the man. And he was looking like he was already injured. And it was definitely God directing them, take this one out, and this is where he'll be at this specific time. And you know, the intelligence don't take any glory for it, because they realize they weren't prepared for this. They were surprised by it, finding him overground, out of his tunnel system, and removing him. So definitely the hand of God was there. This, you know, the Bible tells us our times are in his hands, but even the times of the enemies of Israel are in the hands of God, and this was his time to be removed.
I mean, the story also very much reminds me of the book of Esther and the story of Haman, who wanted the Agagite he was then known as the chief of staff of the prime minister or the grand vizier of the Persian Empire, and he convinced the king to actually carry out a decree to actually massacre or commit ethnic cleansing against the Jewish people across the Persian Empire. And again, we saw that he was the one that was hung on the gallows. So in the same way that if you touch the apple of God's eye, which are the Jewish people, you touch God, and those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. I can't even begin to comprehend the level of hatred in Sinwar's heart and the pure Jew hatred that he had to carry out the massacres against the Jewish people. You only have to look at kind of modern examples of Hitler and the SS, very similar individuals fueled by an absolute demonic hatred of the Jewish people that made him want to commit the massacres against the Jewish people. He did, but of course, like them, he had a day of reckoning. That day of reckoning was last week.
And with both those those examples you used, they were convinced they were doing something for their own God. You know, and Hitler thought that was the right thing to do, and Sinwar thought taking the Jewish people out off the face of the earth was his drive from God. And you kind of think, what sort of God do they think they serve, who wants to? Well, that's what we call genocide. I mean, this accusation of genocide over Israel is an absolute nonsense, because what they wanted to do was, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, to remove the Israeli people out off the face of the earth. That is true genocide, taking a group of people and removing them, annihilating them. So yeah, this was such an example. It's happened in history before, where they do need to, they are just demonically driven to remove what are people who should be their neighbours.
Within about a minute left, Alistair, what is the future for Hamas and what is the future for Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza now that Sinwar has been eliminated? 20 seconds. I
think the picture's fairly clear that there are pockets of Hamas now coming out with white flags, giving up. And I think this is going to start to spread. And beginning of the end down there, and then it's a rebuild program, and likewise concentrate on the north.
Alistair, great to see you back on the Middle East Report. You've done a great job today. Thank you so much. I want to thank you so much for watching this program home. Good news that Sinwar, the architect of October the 7th, has been killed by the IDF last week. Huge amounts of rejoicing in Israel, because he brought nothing but death and destruction. And those who come against God's people, the Jewish people, come against the God of Israel. And clearly, Sinwar was on the wrong side of history. And he represents a warning to other terrorist leaders in the region wanting to carry out similar attacks against Israel, and that will be their fate. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.